everyone, in today's video I'm going to show you how to make my interpretation of the Norwegian protest hat using a circular knitting machine. For more information on this movement, I'll have some links down below. For this video, I'll also be donating all ad revenue and any super thanks that you give to organizations who are helping make a difference for our immigrant and refugee neighbors. So let's get started. So this is my version of the Norwegian protest hat made with the Addi 46-pin circular knitting machine. A couple of the techniques that I used for this particular hat is, number one, I did a double brim. So it's a pretty thick double brim, but it gives it a lot of flexibility, so you can wear it a couple of different ways. I also added some braiding. So on each side, you'll see that there is a little braiding detail that goes up. It gives it a little bit more shape, and also, it's a really cool technique to incorporate into your knitting machine projects. And then of course, the crowning glory, we have the tassel. It's just a braided yarn tassel, but that is an important part of this particular hat. Now, you can wear this hat a couple of ways. You can wear it like this, super loose. This is how I would typically wear it, but because it's a large double brim, you could also pull it down and make it more of like a skull cap, but then it also allows you to see the braiding a little bit more when it's on your head. So this is what we're gonna make today. Let's take a look at our supplies. So for our project today, I'm going to be using the Addi 46 pin, but you could easily convert this to using the Centro 48 pin if that's what you have, with some minor adjustments, and I will call those out. Some of the other tools that you are going to need: number one, waste yarn. We will be using waste yarn in this project, so you'll need waste yarn for casting on, waste yarn for casting off, and then you'll also need one contrasting color, enough to go around your machine, because we're going to be using a ravel cord, and I'll explain what that is when we use it. You're also going to need your scissors and your darning needle. You'll need stitch markers, and then a crochet hook is going to be super helpful to create the braiding that we're going to do. Not necessary, so if you don't have a crochet hook for this project, that'll be fine. You can use your fingers. There's other ways we can get around it, but you do need a hook of some kind. So this is a latch hook. I recommend having one of these in your toolkit anyway, because they're a great tool to help with dropped or tucked stitches. So I would say they're not even that expensive. So I would say get one of these at the minimum, but we will need to have some kind of hook to help, because a double brim does require picking up a tiny little loop and then putting it back onto a pin. Now, for your yarn choices, for this particular project, we are using red. That is part of the history of the Norwegian protest hat. So I have a couple of options here. Caron Simply Soft is one of my favorites to use, and these I already had in my stash. So I didn't go purchase these. I'm not sure if you can even get these anymore. These are, I've had these for years. But I really enjoy Caron Simply Soft. It has a lot of stretch, a lot of give. So for me, I use this on this machine, and I've never had a problem with, beanies being too tight. You also could use something like this. So this is Lion Brand Pound of Love. And this is a 4-weight, and this was a 4-weight as well. They're both acrylic. This one just doesn't have as much give to it, but it does work up pretty well. So I'm gonna use this one today. So we're gonna begin by casting on with our waste yarn. And if you're unfamiliar with waste yarn, I will have some links down below that give you some helpful tips on techniques that will be useful in your circular knitting machine journey. So we are gonna start back here at the first pin, and we are just gonna cast on as we normally would. So behind and front, behind and front, behind and front, all the way around. And then when we get back, we're gonna go into our yarn guide, make sure that's in there, and gonna knit a few more rows. So I just knit 4 rows. You don't need too many, because we are going to use the ravel cord. And a ravel cord just gives you a super easy way to remove the bottom waste yarn. So if you have worked with waste yarn at all, you know that trying to remove the bottom can be a little bit of a pain. It doesn't just easily unravel like the top waste yarn would. So having just one row of a contrasting yarn can make a big difference, because then all you have to do is remove that one piece of yarn, and that will remove the rest of the waste yarn. And I've been using this technique for the last few years since I started using circular knitting machines, and I will never go back, my friends. So we are going to then add our ravel cord. And if you're unfamiliar with color changing, this is exactly what this is. So we are just changing colors. So making sure the tail of that last color you used is under the last pin, and the tail from the new color that you're adding goes under the first pin. So we're just going to hold those together until that tail right there goes under and down. So once it's down, it's locked in place, and now you can let go. And then we're just going to knit one row. Make sure that's pushed down. So now that we're back, we're going to place the tail back in the center. So again, just one row of that contrasting color. Then for this pattern, we are just going to cast on with our working yarn right here. So we just leave a little bit of a tail just so it doesn't accidentally slip out. And we are going to place that in our yarn guide. Hold on to the tail from that previous round. And we are going to knit 40 rows. Now, a couple things that I want to point out. Number one, if you have a row counter, don't forget to turn that on. Or if you don't have a row counter, have some method like a little hand counter or something, because you will need to be accurate in your counts. So we're going to hold these two together once again, make sure that it's down. Wonderful. And then we are going to knit 40 rows. Now, what I want you to do though, is once we get back around here, so go around twice. And once you get back to the beginning, we're going to place a stitch marker on that first loop. And the reason we're going to do that is when we fold our brim in half to add it back onto the pins, we want to make sure that they aren't skewed at all. And yes, you can eyeball it, but this is going to get pretty long. So we just want to make sure that we can see that this is the end of this row, so we can pull that loop back up to the first pin. Now, one other thing before we continue knitting, if you are new, something that is really important for you to do is to pool your yarn. And what I mean by that is to make sure that you have enough loose tension from this yarn that it doesn't accidentally tug. Because what you'll find is if you've ever made a project and you see there's like a row that's off, or you have, a couple of stitches that seem just very tight while the rest are loose, a lot of times this is simply from the tension of your yarn. So with this, I just make sure that I have a pool of yarn in reserve down here at the bottom, just to make sure that that doesn't accidentally happen. Also, I know that I do things a little differently than some folks. Some folks have some great setups where they have like a tensioning fork in here. I have purchased one of those in the past. I didn't find it helpful, honestly, but you may have that. I've seen some other tools available, but you know what? The best tool you can use is your hand, and that is what I do. So when I'm using the circular knitting machine, I always have that pool, that reserve of yarn in my left hand, so I can feel it and make sure that it's loose, right, like this, before it ever gets to the yarn tensioner and before it ever gets to the project. This also can help if you get knots in your yarn, because a lot of those cheaper yarns, which I am guilty of using, a lot of those yarns will have flaws in them, and they might have a knot. And if there's a knot and you try to knit it with your machine, it could damage the actual machine itself. So anyway, that is just a little tip that I do. So now we're going to continue to knit to 40 rows, and I'll meet you right back here. All right, so we're coming up here to our 40th row. Okay, so we're back to that first pin. So we just knit those 40 rows. And now what I was talking about before, we are going to make a double brim. So this particular hat has that double brim at the bottom, but then it is going to be single at the top, again, giving it a lot of stretch, and then allowing us to do a little bit of additional details. So here's that first stitch marker that I had you mark. Again, super important, because right now, if you were to look here and you were to hope and cross your fingers, you may be able to follow the column down and find the exact loop, but this way you just know that there are no questions about it. So we are going to take this loop, right? That's our first loop, and we are going to use the little latch hook, or again, you could use a crochet hook if that's what you have, or you could even try to use a curved darning needle, maybe a little bit more challenging, but certainly you can try. So then we're going to take our loop and we're going to pull it up and put it back on the hook. Once it's on the hook, you're going to push it down. Okay, so we want to push it down there. And then we can remove that stitch marker. We don't need it any longer. Now you are leaving your yarn tail in the yarn feeder because we do want to make sure we're still knitting as we go around. So that was the first one. Now we want to make sure that we find the second one, which is kind of hiding, but it's right here. And we are going to, and we'll tighten this up when we're done, when we're cast off of the machine. So we're going to knit, again, making sure that this goes down, but we're going to pick up that next loop and we're going to place it on the hook. And again, push that down and then push that down. You're going to crank your handle again, take the next one, put it on, and then you can pull down from the back, which makes it really easy. You're going to pick up this loop. Try not to get the waste yarn. There we go. And pull it on the next pin. And then just keep pushing down as you go. And then we're going to do this all the way around. All right, and then when we get back to that first and last pin, you'll find that you have that last one right there. So we'll make sure we do that last one. Once we've gone all the way around, so you can see here is how the brim has already started to take shape. Super exciting. And then we are going to knit 5 additional rows. So just regular rows. You will want to go slow because you'll notice that because there are 2 loops on each pin, it does have a tendency to stick up. So we just need to make sure we're pushing those down as we go around. So we're just going to do, again, 5 more rows. So now that we have knit all of our rows, we are at 46 total rows. Okay, and that does not include the waste yarn. So we have 46 rows right here. So we're going to mark a couple of pins. And the reason for that is what we're going to be adding to the top of this beanie, just to give it a little bit more dimension, is we're going to be adding some braids up the sides. And that will give it more of the shape to match the original hat. And also just adds a really fun detail. If you do not want to venture into the world of braiding or drop stitches, you can simply just knit the rest of the rows here, which would be an additional 30 rows, and then cast off without waste yarn. You could cinch it. So if you wanted something super simple, you were happy with just having a double brim, you have that option as well. But it's so much fun to try out new techniques, and I'm going to show you that this can be such a cool technique to add to your knitting machine projects. So we're going to mark both halves of our project, and we're going to mark pins number 1 and 2, and we're going to do that just by placing our stitch markers, just grabbing the loop immediately behind the pin. So there's 1, and there is pin number 2. Okay, so we have 1 and 2. And then depending on the size of machine you have, essentially you're just cutting it in half. So if you have a 46 pin machine, half of 46 is 23. So then you're just going to do 23 and 24. Okay, so the 2 pins exactly opposite of the first 2 pins, cutting it in half. If you have a 48, you're going to do the exact same thing. You're just going to need to account for the 2 extra pins. You can also, once you get into this technique of braiding, you could drop, so essentially we're going to be dropping stitches to create the braids. Sounds scary, promise it's not. But you could also drop 3 stitches and have really thick and noticeable braids. So there's lots of options, but we're going to go with this one here. So we're going to find pin number 23, 1 and 2, and 23. I'm going to mark that there, and pin 24. and what these stitch markers are going to do for us. Okay, so I want to clarify the importance of these stitch markers. So these are going to hold these loops in place. So when we drop all of the stitches that are in these two and these two rows, you don't lose all of the work you've already done. So these are going to just kind of be our holders, our little loop holders, and then we'll create the braid. So now that we have that, we are going to do 30 additional rows to finish off the hat. So now that we've done that, I'm going to knit an additional 30 rows, and that'll get us to 76 total rows. You may find that you want your hat to be longer, and in that case, you would just add some additional rows to your project. But I'm going to go ahead and go with 30 this time, because it's for me, and then I'll meet you back here. Here on row 76. Okay, so this is what we have so far. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna cast off with waste yarn, but we're going to drop the stitches that we mark. Now, there's a couple options. The tail we're gonna use to cinch the end, to finish the end, and then also we're gonna make a tassel. It's probably easier just to make the tassel and attach it separately. That's what I did with my first sample that I made. So we just want to make sure that we do have enough of this yarn here to finish the edge. So I'm just going to wrap it around my machine loosely, add a little bit more, and then cut that off. Just makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so again, that's under that last pin, and we push that down into our work. Now, with pins 1 and 2, remember, we are going to be dropping those stitches. So what we're going to do is we're actually, and this is the scary part, so don't forget to add your waste yarn, because we are going to continue without any yarn right here. And that's going to drop these 2 stitches so they don't knit, and it'll release all of them down the row. So we are going to make sure that you have your waste yarn ready to go. Okay, so we just went past these first 2 pins, and now we are going to make sure that this waste yarn goes under this pin right here. Okay, and again, we're doing that because we want to make sure those 2 are dropped. Then we do want to notate so we don't accidentally forget over here. 23 is going to be here. So in fact, I'm just going to put a little indicator for myself, just reminding me so I don't forget. Just a little something there to remind my brain. So we're going to keep going. And then here, take this out. So here's number 23. So we are actually going to go around 23 and around 24, and then put it back into our yarn guide. Okay, make sure it goes back here on 25, and then continue around. Now you're just going to not worry about the ones that have already dropped, and we are going to slowly, just because it is a yarn change, so that can cause some tucked or dropped stitches. So we're just going to go slowly, making sure that everything is picked up here. I tend to do more waste yarn at the end of the project, just because that does fall off very easily. Okay, and then once we're back to the end, now we're just going to continue to knit all the way off of the machine. So first thing that we're going to do before we do the braiding is we are going to remove this waste yarn right here. I want to show you that ravel cord that I mentioned before. So we are going to end up tying off. We have that one tail right here that we will need to attach, but we're going to do that once we remove the waste yarn. So the ravel cord, just find one end. Okay, so here we just have one end, just one loop right in the center, and I'm just going to pull it. I'm just going to pull it all the way out. So left side, right side. I just pulled this whole ravel cord out of the project. Now, watch the magic. That bottom waste yarn comes right off because it was attached using the ravel cord. All right, future Tori here. One thing that I forgot to show you was what to do with this one little yarn tail. So this was the original cast on yarn tail. So you don't have to do anything fancy with it. You could just knot it off and hide it in the brim. So I'm just going to go through, do a single knot. it's secure in there. And then I'm just going to, maybe I'll do 2 knots just to make sure. Side, excellent. And then you're just gonna weave it inside the brim. So remember, it's 2 sides, so you can just place it in the brim through, and then trim off the extra, and then it'll be hidden in there. So this is what our double brim looks like. Okay, again, just gives it a little bit of variety, a little bit of difference, and then you don't have the bulk from having it all the way. So what we want to do though is I'm going to push those stitch markers to the front of our work. So I just want to be able to see them because we're going to work from the right side of our project. If you work from the wrong side, you will not get the braid that you want. So we just need to make sure that the right side is facing up. Okay, so let's just start on the side with our 2 pins that are over here. So at the top, you're gonna see, remember we had those drop stitches. So we're just going to release all of those. And if we did this correctly, which fingers crossed, right? If we do this correctly, we shouldn't have any running because the loops will be within the stitch markers. That is exactly what we want to see. So it's not going to go down into the brim. It's truly just going to start right here. You do want to make sure that all of those loops are undone though. It's very important. Okay, so it kind of looks like a ladder. So we just have this little bit of a ladder here. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, but let's just start with one side at a time. So this is where I mentioned that having a crochet hook is going to come in handy because we essentially are going to just be braiding all of these loops together, starting from the bottom and working our way up to the top. We're going to start with these 2 loops. And I'm using an 8mm just because it's a little bit bigger, and since we have so many so much yarn to pick up, I prefer using this one, but use whatever you have on hand. So we are going to take that stitch marker off and put it on our crochet hook. In fact, let's go ahead and put that one on our crochet hook and then take the stitch marker off. All right, so we have those 2 loops hanging out, right? So they're right here. So then what we're gonna do is we are going to braid this together. And I always like to start by twisting it on that first stitch because if not, you might get this gap between your stitches. So all I did, again, just showing you what I'm doing here. Those 2 loops are on our hook and I'm just going to rotate it around. It just tightens it up. Now, depending on the look you are going for, you can pick up 1, 2, 3 rows, whatever you want to do aesthetically. For this particular project, I am just going to pick up 2. I don't want it to be too tight. So that's the other thing is the more you pick up, the tighter it's going to be over here. And this is just to add a little bit more dimension to the hat and just a little bit of shape. So I'm going to pick those 2 and we're going to pull it through. Just like a slip stitch. Make sure none of them are hidden. Going back, we're going to take the next 2 on the hook. We're going to take these, pull it through. And then we're just going to continue doing this all the way down. And you'll see that you start to get this little braid. Now, if this is not that noticeable to you, let's say that you want it to be a little bit more noticeable. Let's show you what it looks like with a few different techniques. So we can take 3. So let me do a couple with 3. I'll just remove these when we're done. Okay, so the 3 starts to get really noticeable because now you have a lot of definition there. So totally up to you. So whatever I'm doing on this side, I'm going to continue to do on the other side. So we did 2 with 2 at the bottom, and then we are going to do the rest with 3. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll try it out. Always open to try new things. One of the other techniques that I've done is that twisting method that I showed you. Doing that throughout the braid tends to look pretty cool. But we'll just do 3 all the way up then. Like I said, it will tighten it and it will make it a little bit shorter, but the braids are definitely more visible. Okay, now when you get up to the top, right, we have 1 left. So that's what we want. We want to end with 1. If for some reason you have more than 1 left, just go ahead and braid those and end with just the 1 loop. So we'll just take that last loop and pull it through. And then we're going to take our stitch marker and put that on there. And that's because we are going to then come back, okay, when we're done, and we're gonna pick up all of those loops and cinch them together. So here is what this side is looking like, okay? Again, really pretty from the side there, and then we're just gonna repeat it on the other side. Okay, so those are the sides. So now we need to finish the top and create the cinch. So for this part, we are gonna use our darning needle. So we're gonna come up and find the yarn tail that we left. Again, it's pretty long. We don't need all of this. So I actually might cut this, and then I'll save this and I'll just use this as a ravel cord for a future project. So now what we're going to do, just like when we're casting off the machine. So we're going to pick up all of our live loops all the way around. In fact, don't forget, we're going to start with this one right here. And there should be just the one. So you should have one on each side. Okay, so that's picked up. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna continue to go around and we're gonna pick up all of the loops. Just like this. Just don't forget to pick up that other loop on the other side. In fact, where is it? So I don't, there it is. Don't want to accidentally forget it. Also be careful that you are not picking up your waste yarn. I have done this, and what it means is you end up having to cut it out, and we don't want any waste. Okay, so here we are back at this loop. We picked that one up, and we're gonna pick that loop up. All the live loops are officially picked up. So now that we have all of the live loops on our yarn tail, we can remove the waste yarn. And the top waste yarn does not need a ravel cord, as I mentioned, because you can barely even breathe on it and it comes right out. So we'll just remove the waste yarn. And now we are just going to gently pull all of this together to cinch it, just like if you were doing a cinched beanie. Oh, so look how adorable. So you have the little braids, you have the brim right here. So what we're gonna do, we are going to be adding the tassel. So up here at the top, the easiest method of closing, you don't have to get fancy, it's not gonna be visible. You do just wanna make sure you're not getting any other part of the beanie besides the top. So what you can do is just go from one side to the other and simply do a double knot. Okay, just make sure it's tightened together. I just tighten that once. And then I went the opposite direction. And tighten that again. And that is the bulk of the hat. But now we need to make our tassel. Tassel, super easy. You can use whichever method you would like. I am just going to braid it after I attach it, but I do want it to be pretty long. I find that with this particular hat, the tassel itself is, you know, one of the most impactful pieces. Measurement wise, it is about 36 inches. You can also just take it from one of your arms to your shoulder, and that should be sufficient as well. So I am going to cut one of those the right length that I want, because we are going to fold this in half, just as and oh, by the way, so I already have one strand on here. So that's going to be one strand. It's going to be part of our braid. So however thick you want it. In fact, I think I want my braid to be 4 strands in each little section. So now what I'm going to do, so I have all of my yarn that I want to add to the center. Now this is where it can get, depending on how you want to do this, it's totally up to you. I am going to grab a needle with a little bigger eye. So some machines come with needles like this that I usually don't use very often, but because of the size of the eye, I find this super helpful with this particular project. So I'm going to place all of these tails into the eye. Then, for me, what is going to be easiest just making sure these are not knotted, is now I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go down into, so let's get down so we have some thread here. So I want these on the edge, so I'm going to go down into this side and just pull it into the center of our beanie. Okay, make sure those edges come out. Excellent. And then I'm going to go back up the other side. And just pull that through. There we go. Okay, so now we can play around with this. We can adjust as we need to. So let's make sure that these are evenly spaced here. So we're just going to pull all those out. And then we're going to knot this together. So we're just going to, whatever method you want to use, but you could do like a double knot. You do just want to make sure that everything is laying nicely. So I'm just going to pull that. And then I'm going to do one more knot. Now it's going to be pretty bulky, but again, this hat has kind of that look to it anyway, and our braid is going to be pretty bulky itself, so that's going to come out at the top. And then the last thing we're going to do is just braid it all together. All right, and when you get down to the end, then you're just going to knot it off.